Hello, and welcome to a Walk of Faith podcast. I'm Marybel Mayorga, and I'm on a mission. I hope to orient and guide you through your journey of faith. But I cannot do it alone, so we will go through it together with the help of many friends. You may have a lot of questions, which is totally normal. In fact, I am happy that you have them. So don't worry, we're going to cover them and help you so that you don't feel alone. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get started.
Today I'm happy because you know this guy. He was there on the first episode, Julian Paparella, and he's coming back because he's amazing. And of course, because of this theme, he's an expert on this theme. He's studying, actually, he's finishing his doctorate in about marriage and family over there in Rome, in the Institute John Paul II. So welcome back, Julian.
Thank you, Marybel. I always love being with you. It's so nice to join you today.
Julian, so in a couple of days, it's gonna be Valentine's Day, right? And so what about just talk about love, right? This huge subject, love. And since you're studying it and all that, I wanted to ask you some questions and some questions that I think it's really important that we can, dive in. And because these are essential questions for Catholics. If, for example, we start with marriage, uh, a lot of young people, young adults are asking if, first of all, if that's their vocation first, and second of all, why it's so important, marriage for Catholics. Many there's a lot of temptation to go outside and to go, just celebrate the union, you know, outside a country with beside the beach and all that. But we don't really often understand why it's really important, marriage, and how God is between those two people, right? Because when we go and then we say yes, we're not just saying yes between you, me, and the guy or the girl, right? It has to be between three-person, which is me, my husband, and God. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really a crucial, like you said, essential question. I really see that there's sort of two aspects here. One is that every single one of us, every human heart is made for this spousal kind of love. Why? Because that's the kind of love that God is. He's this total outpouring of love for the good of the other, that's faithful, that's free, that's fruitful. And that's what marriage is. So, God, as a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it might be funny to think of it that way, but He is this total outpouring of free, faithful, fruitful love. And that's the image that we are made in. We as human beings are made in the image of that kind of God. We're made for that kind of love. And so, marriage, in our human experience, even long before Jesus came here to earth, marriage is an experience of sharing with one other person that kind of love that God has for us and that God wants to fill our hearts with so that they can overflow in building that type of relationship that He wants with us, with others. So that's a call for every single human being. Doesn't matter what your religion is, doesn't matter if you have a religion or not. The human heart is made for that kind of eternal, deep, everlasting, loving relationship. And marriage is a way of living that out. And then for us as Christians, believing in God, trying to follow Jesus, that opens a whole new perspective on what this relationship with another person, that marriage is all about. Because it helps us to realize that, like you said, it's not enough to just be two in a marriage. You run out of gas.
Yeah.
I like this beautiful expression that a Christian is a beggar who knows where the bread is. All of us are beggars. All of us have this longing in our heart. It's part of being human. And a Christian is someone who's found this bread that is God, this bread that is Jesus, to be able to satisfy our longing. And not just one time, but every day in this ongoing journey of life. So God is really the key to every marriage. And for us as Christians, we try and discover that in a very intentional way, but it's also good news that we can share with others how to discover God who is already there in the midst of our relationship, in the midst of marriage, in the midst of family life, and who wants to draw us to an ever greater fullness of love.
Exactly. And this is an important point. Sometimes we tend to forget that, or we think about, marriage is just between me, you and me, and then that's it. And then we do it for the fla and then the party and then all the etc. thing. But a lot of people, they just tend to forget that God is working, through
Absolutely.
marriage.
Absolutely.
How can we explain that God, because first of all, yes, like you said, if you're two guys, you're gonna run out of gas and you need his presence, because marriage life, the journey of that, it's up and down. There's a lot of that, there's a lot of discernment, there's a lot of um uh, it's a learning journey at the same time, right?
Absolutely.
So how is God working? How can God work through a marriage?
I think the best teacher in this respect is really our own personal experience.
Mm,
I think all of us realize, Christian and non Christian alike, that we can't do it ourselves. We can't make it through life on our own steam. We need help. We need other people. Ultimately, we need God. We ourselves are not capable of giving ourselves everything that we long for and desire in life. Right from the moment of our birth, even our conception,
mm,
we are dependent on other people. We're in this beautiful interdependent relationship with our parents at the outset, with other family members, with society, with our friends, with our coworkers. Sometimes in our individualistic society today, we want to ignore those deep bonds, those deep relationships that we have with other people by the fact of being human, by the fact of living in this world. Sometimes as if those relationships aren't even real, or that we have this illusion that we could do it alone. But we see in our experience that we're imperfect, that we have wounds, that we have flaws, and that we need something else. In Christian language, we would call this salvation.
mm,
And we realize through the experience of our life that none of us can save ourselves. None of us are truly happy by just being alone on our own deserted island, on our own planet, somewhere in the universe, because we're made for relationship. John Paul II would talk so much about how we're made for communion,
yeah.
that we are not just individuals, we are persons, and persons are made for communion. So, in this respect, I think we can ask ourselves not so much, oh, why is God meddling in my marriage? Why is he coming to add his own presence? Why is he coming to, but rather, how is God already there, active and present in my very desire to love another person and to be loved by this other person? If you're in a relationship, if you're thinking of marriage, if you're considering commitment, or if you're in a marriage, think back to how you fell in love with that person. Think back to that initial desire, that initial flame that was awakened within you. God was there. Oftentimes, we don't think in those terms. We put love on one side, God on the other side. But St. John tells us God is love. Any love that's true, that's deep, that's real, that's oriented towards others. God is at work there. God is present there. So, how much more so is that true with marriage? Some people have called it the sandpaper of holiness, because it's literally the most intense relationship that we could possibly have as human beings. It's every single day for the rest of your life until one or the other of you dies and goes
Nice.
home to God.
Mhm.
You know, and it's such an incredible relationship, this relationship between man and woman, that it even creates other human beings. There's no other relationship that does that. and not
Yep.
just creates them in a merely biological sense, but brings them into the world, helps them discover what being human is all about. So it's not so much how does God, kind of like this powder that we add to the top of the concoction of marriage. It's God is not some icing on the cake of marriage. He's not the cherry on the sundae. Rather, God is there step by step, right from the very outset, and He accompanies us so that our love, through the ups and downs, can become more and more authentic and life giving. And something we often don't consider is that He is especially there in the difficult times, the times of woundedness, the times of sin, and the times of difficulty, because our God as Christians is a God who redeems us.
Mhm.
Christianity is a religion about redemption. Even for us as Christians, that's difficult to understand. Sometimes we think that we have a religion about purity,
Mhm.
where God is only interested in if we make ourselves pure, and then, okay, maybe He'll take an interest in us. Rather, our God is a redeemer. That means He comes into the sticky situations, the ugliness, the woundedness, the darkness. He brings light there, and He transforms that bad situation into something good, into something beautiful.
What would you say, for example, before marriage? Okay. This girl or boy is thinking he's dating or she's dating. Um, because I know a lot of teens, I know a lot of young adults who are wondering if he's the one, if she's the one. And then they get scared because they might know the importance of marriage. They don't want to, do the whole divorce. They don't want to do that, and they get scared, especially if they see that the other person is not Catholic. And yes, it's time for discernment, but at the same time, she or he is kind of stuck because yes, the other person is nice, but what would I do? What am I gonna do? She or he is thinking about the future because, as you said, the beauty of marriage is yes, it's create life too as well. Um, so, what would you say to these adults? They're thinking, but there's a big ambiguity there in their head, not knowing, and they get scared, especially scared. How can we reassure them?
I think that fear, as each and every one of us knows, is part of being human. It's a
Mhm.
normal part of life. And I think the fear of commitment also comes from realizing the weight of what that commitment means. And marriage is one of those weighty commitments. But it's actually a weighty commitment that's going to totally fulfill who we are. It's not something that's going to, take away
Mhm.
who I am, but it's the fulfillment of who I am. Benedict the 16th used to say, Jesus gives us everything and He takes nothing away. In other words, that nothing that truly fulfills us is taken away by these big, weighty commitments that we make in life, whether it's marriage, whether it's following Jesus, whether it's being a priest or a sister. These commitments that engage our whole self do not deny who we truly are, they fulfill who we truly are. Instead of realizing that, in fact, me being fulfilled comes from deep mutual relationships with other people. It's not in cutting me off from other people, cutting myself off, distancing myself from others, that I'm going to be happy. In fact, my fulfillment comes from entering deeply into relationship with others, which are also tricky relationships. No relationship is just cookie cutter perfect. Relationships can be tough. They are tough.
They are tough.
You sometimes you can't stand the person that you go to bed next to,
I
and
mean,
you're
we
just
know
thinking,
you're
my
married.
gosh,
I'm married.
there's a
We-
Seinfeld episode that, Kramer says, marriage is a prison. You get up, she's there. You go to bed, she's there.
He's there.
The other person becomes inescapable. But we're not meant to escape from love and from relationship as human beings. Because if we escape from relationship, if we escape from commitment, we're actually distancing ourselves from what really fulfills us. So in this sense, I would say, the first part of your question here, commitment, it is a big commitment. That's why marriage needs to be discerned. Time is a great ally in that sense. They say time is one of God's greatest messengers. There's no rush to get married in 6 months, in a year. There's also no point in just extending a dating relationship indefinitely just because we're not sure. But I think there's some kind of happy medium, which is going to be up to each couple to decide, where you say, okay, you know what? We're not fully prepared. No one is fully prepared, but we have like the basic ingredients here to start baking. It doesn't need to be the finished cake. We just need to have like enough of the basic ingredients in our relationship. What are some of those basic ingredients? I think even if we don't have the same religion, we could ask ourselves the question, is it possible that God call me to be married with someone who isn't Catholic as I am? Or I'm Catholic and he or she is Christian but not Catholic, or I'm Catholic and he or she is Muslim. you know God is in the life of every human person. That's one of the most profound convictions of Pope Francis. He's been saying it right from the start of his time as Pope. And that to me is one of the most important truths for us to remember. God is in the life of every single human person. So God is in the life of every Muslim, Catholic, indigenous person, Protestant, atheist, agnostic, you name it. It's a human person. God is present there. So of course God can call us into relationship with one another. Sometimes it requires that we really, make an effort
Mm-hmm.
to find common ground when it's not already necessarily there. But that's the same thing, whether it's religion or also culture. My
Yes.
wife is French, from France. I'm Canadian. We learned very on in our dating relationship that it was going to require both of us receiving the other, including their culture.
Mm-hmm.
Just as the other person's family is part of who they are, so too their culture is part of who they are. You can't say, well, I like you, but not the country you come from
Get
or
away
your
that country.
parents, or, it's part of the whole person. And marriage is saying yes to that whole person, committing to that whole person. So I would say it's about saying, okay, do I really feel that in loving this person, my heart flourishes?
Mm-hmm.
Asking ourselves those deeper questions so that it's truly a spiritual discernment. Because if your capacity to love is flourishing with this person, God is at work there. And that's something to pay attention to. Even if the other person doesn't have exactly the same religious beliefs as you, your religious beliefs tell you God is there. And as Jacob says at one point in the book of Genesis, God was there and I was unaware. So often we don't realize that he's there, that he goes before us, that he's
Yes.
already there long before we think of him there. That's the case with all our relationships in life. But I think focusing on those deeper movements of the heart, when I'm with this person, walking through life with this person, being in a relationship with this person, what are some of the fruits of that in me and also in my relationship with other people in my
Mm-hmm.
life other than this person? If being in a relationship is just making both of us kind of enter into this fusion with each other, where we're just like magnets, where we just kind of stick to each other and we forget about the rest of the world, that's normal for a certain kind of early stage of most romantic relationships.
Yeah.
But eventually it's going to mature much more deeply than that. And if it stays in that kind of just you and me, and the rest of the universe kind of fades away, that's not really a relationship grounded in love. That's more a
Mm-hmm.
relationship where kind of possessing one another, kind of cutting ourselves off from each other, isolating ourselves from each other. So I think a really good barometer is in seeing whether or not this is really the relationship for me. What are also some of the effects of this relationship on the other good relationships in my life? in being in a relationship with this person, does it make me want to be more authentic, more loving, more genuine in my relationship with my own family, with my friends, with people in the community, especially with those in need, and with God? Or is it kind of turning me in on myself, making me think like only this person has any importance in my life and that's it? I can just cut off the rest of the world. Seeing in which direction are our desires leading us,
Mhm.
and then following God on the path that he sets before us.
You were talking about perfection.
Hmm.
I mean, we're humans. We're poor humans here. We're sinners, and of course, we want everything to be perfect. Um,
And
but
especially ourselves.
we especially ourselves, yes.
Hmm.
But we know that it's not true. We're not we're
Hmm.
not perfect, right? We're not perfect. Everyone is not perfect. Everyone,
Hmm.
especially well, if you're thinking about getting married or just dating, uh, he or she will never be perfect. So put that in your mind
That's for sure.
that
You
he
can
or she
depend
will
on
never
that.
exactly. And you too, you are not perfect. So just
Hmm.
start like that. Start
Hmm.
like that because we're not perfect here.
Hmm.
But the thing is that when you were talking about the length of the marriage, if we're thinking really seriously about that, and a lot of people are waiting for, oh, when I have this amount of money, when I have this house, when I have this, I just want it to be perfect because excuses, right?
Hmm.
What is the danger about that? Because there is, or also, what would you say to people who to that they want that to be perfect? Of course, we're not saying here that your love relationship is gonna suck and then but
Hmm.
we want it as perfect as possible. We're on this journey, but perfection in this world, is it
Hmm.
possible in this
Hmm.
world? I'm not talking about heaven. I'm not talking about heaven. I'm talking about here. What would you say to these people that they're waiting that,
Hmm.
oh, when he's gonna change about that, when I'm gonna change about this, what?
First of all, I think it's important that we're not here to criticize
Mhm.
anybody. Like you said, this desire for perfectionism is often part of just
Yeah.
everyday normal human experience. Sometimes on one hand, we can tolerate other people's weaknesses much better than we can tolerate our own. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's in
The opposite.
reverse.
Mhm.
My weaknesses are just fine. I can do whatever I want. I can make whatever mistakes I want because after all, I'm only human, that classic line. But other people, oh, if they mess up, if they make a mistake, oh, it's unforgivable. It's just awful. It's
Mhm.
horrendous. How dare they? So you're absolutely right. And my question would be like, does God call us to perfectionism? No. He's much more lucid than that. He's much more wise than that. He knows that we're not perfect in this human sense that we want, that we're never going to make a mistake, that we're always going to be just as we're supposed to be. He knows that we're not like that.
Mhm.
He's our father. He knows that his children are not just perfect like that. That's why he sent his son to save us, to transform us, to renew us, to lead us on a journey of gradually becoming more and more his beloved sons and daughters. You know, he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. That you can see all the way through scripture with the apostles, for example. Here's Matthew sitting at a tax collector booth,
Mhm.
embroiled in his greed for money, kind of ripping off his fellow Jews, serving the treacherous Roman Empire. And Jesus comes right there and he calls him. And Pope Francis would say, he had mercy on him and he called him. And for us as humans, oftentimes those two are separate. If I need to have mercy on you, that means that you're kind of, you made a mistake, you're kind
Mhm.
of weak, you're flawed. And so I don't really necessarily want to choose you. In God, those two go together. He chooses to have mercy on us. And in having mercy on us, he chooses us. You know? How does that inform our way of looking at other people, and especially with these people that we're called to have these most intimate, most intense relationships of life with, you know. So we can never expect that our spouse, that our boyfriend, girlfriend, fiance is ever going to be perfect. If we're waiting for perfection, heaven will come and then maybe, we'll have perfection, though I think that perfection will look much different than the kind of perfection we often
Yeah.
seek here on earth. But it's rather growing with each other. That's much more of an adventure. That's much more interesting. Instead of just kind of waiting as some passive bystander for either me or the other person to just magically become perfect,
Mm.
how about saying, well, yeah, this person's not perfect. How can we help each other to grow? How can we be like an orchard together, trees growing together through life, bearing fruit together, enduring together throughout all the days that we share, the years, the decades that we share with each other. Not because we're perfect, because both of us are growing, we're becoming something new all the time, you know, because God is constantly at work with us. John Henry Newman would say, in heaven it is otherwise, but here down below on earth, to live is to change, and to live well is to change often. And I think that's definitely true in marriage. You've got to
Yeah.
change often,
Yeah.
because marriage is going to reveal those kinds of things. Any kind of loving relationship, close relationship with another human being is going to reveal those areas that you're most struggling with. Let's say you're a person who has difficulty listening and being attentive to others. Well, I can tell you, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, maybe especially your girlfriend, your wife is going to point that out to you very clearly, because that's part of loving, is really being attentive, listening, welcoming what the other has to share with me. So if I'm, lacking in that department, that's going to be something that I have to
Yeah.
work on, you know. So I think, having God's gaze on ourselves and on each other, it's a merciful gaze. It's a gaze that doesn't expect us to just be perfect, but it's a gaze that helps us to grow, that leads us on a journey, and that always draws us deeper.
I think the magical word here is growing. Since we're not perfect, I think we must grow. I think we must learn. It's just
Absolutely.
logical that we have to
Absolutely.
learn about ourselves
Mm,
and then about the other person too as well concerning your relationship. But
mhm,
without
mhm,
growing, and if your relationship you feel like it's dying or like you feel it's still, well, ask yourself some questions,
mhm,
a relationship is a journey. It's a journey until until you die, until the other person's die, until you die as well. Because you said yes in front of God in the good and in the bad.
mm.
Um and
Sickness and in
forever.
health. Yep.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I'm
And
not a parent yet. You're a parent. You have two
mhm,
children, and I'd really be interested in hearing your perspective on this. But I think one of the ways where we see our need to grow most is that no one is born a parent. You
nope.
have to learn how to parent. You have to learn, because all of a sudden now you have to teach this
Yeah.
new human being, your son, your daughter, even something as basic as like, how do you use a spoon? Like,
Yeah. Believe
not
me,
to,
I
like,
would love to have that Bible for parents. I mean, in that, well, to be honest with you, the Bible, because I do have my Bible just right beside my bed, but the Bible, there's a lot of tips and tricks for parents there. You just have to read
tell
it
us
there.
more. Tell us more. What have you discovered? How has Marybel grown as a parent, with these two beautiful kids that God's given you? What's it been like
to,
for
to
you
be
growing, learning how to be a parent?
to be honest with you, when you have, like you said, it's true. There's no book, right? Real book, let's say. They're trying to, give you book. But the sentence they say, my kid changed me.
Hmm.
My kid, and it's really, really that. If through prayer a lot, I discover that I had to do some work on me.
Hmm.
My kids showed me, I wasn't patient at all, but my kids showed me another level of patience.
Hmm.
That by learning that level, I can apply that in my everyday life, in my relationship with my daughter, with my boy, in my relationship, especially with my husband.
Hmm.
Because if I work on myself, I know the rest of my family is going to be happy too as well.
Mm,
But yes, there's so much to learn, especially by being a mom, being a dad, because kids are showing us the way. Believe me, kids are showing us the way.
mm,
We just have to be so attentive and not get distracted because we're also us, we're tired, we're distracted, we're all, but it's so interesting how if you're really attentive, your kids are showing you the way and how you should not just be, but or how you should become as a human being as well, a better one, not just for the love of your kids, but for the love of the family, the rest, any relationship. How many things, believe me, I needed to
mm,
understand, especially with my little 5-year-old, because the other one is a baby. But with my 5-year-old, um, she at the beginning, I was a lot of, about me. Everything was about me, centering myself. It was just
mhm,
me, and I didn't want to lose me as a woman. But the
mm,
love um, that this little girl just showed me through the months, through the years, because it took me years to
mm,
understand that it's
mm,
beyond powerful. That's
mm,
why I say love is powerful, friends. Love is
mm,
powerful, but it's again the same thing as marriage. It's not it's not gonna happen like this. It's a
mm,
journey. It's a journey. It's a real journey.
mm,
But yes, now if we talk about exactly this journey, which is so interesting because when we if we go a little bit back about marriage, if we talk about, we say, well, some people are scared, some people like they don't want to commit, they don't want to, they don't want to move forward because they think about sexuality, they think about
mm,
that theme.
mm,
And I don't want to go like into like morals and stuff and what you should do, but how can um we have peace?
mm,
Because that's sexuality, yes, it's there. We're humans, right? We're humans. And but how can we have peace in our heart when we're thinking about that, when we're like, okay,
mm,
there's I'm hearing a lot of things concerning sexuality. What should I know? What are the important um points, let's say, about sexuality in my,
mm,
in my marriage, or even, before marriage? What should I understand about that in the Catholic, in
mhm,
my religion, in my Catholic faith?
mhm, mhm. Absolutely. I think there's really, unfortunately, we could talk about like a hypersexualization of our society. That's true, like you can barely leave the grocery store without seeing, scantily clad,
Hmm.
models on your way out. And yet at the same time, it's not just that sexuality is becoming more and more present around us, but the even bigger problem is that sexuality is being degraded. And the two go together because what's all around us is a very cheap kind of sexuality.
Hmm.
Christopher West would talk about kind of like a fast food kind of sexuality. And we're in many ways kind of a fast food culture, a fast food society. We want everything right away. We don't want it to cost too much. We want it to taste good. We don't necessarily think about the kind of effects that it has on us long term. What kind of effect does it have on who we are, on our insides, let's say, whether it's a Big Mac or some of these kind of cheap forms of
Hmm.
sexuality. But I think what's really, really important is that we have kind of a paradigm shift from seeing these kinds of things through the eyes of guilt, like, oh, you shouldn't do this, or I feel guilty about this, or, even in the Bible, one of the names for the devil is the accuser, the one who loves to accuse us, the one who makes us feel awful about ourselves. That's not God. God doesn't make us feel depressed about who we are. God doesn't make us lose hope because of our mistakes. God is the opposite. God lifts us up. God draws us forward. He picks us up, takes us by the hand. He walks forward with us step by step, like a good father. with his little son or daughter. You know, when your son or daughter, you who have one of each falls, especially when learning to walk, you don't scold them. Hey, why did you fall down? You're not supposed to fall down. You're not allowed to fall down. No, you pick them up. Maybe you take them in your arms. Then you help them to walk even better than they were before. you know? So I think sexuality, especially in the light of the gospel, in light of our faith as Christians, has to be seen really in that light as a path towards greater freedom, as a path towards greater peace, the word you used, as a path by which we become able to receive and give this kind of spousal love to which God calls us. You know, whether we're married or not, God calls us to have relationships that reflect his faithfulness, that reflect his freedom, that reflect his fruitfulness. You know? And I think oftentimes we just see these things as don'ts, and then we want to rebel against them.
Mm-hmm.
Some real issues in our day today, like pornography, masturbation, these kinds of things. So we can take an approach that says, well, these things aren't really important. Like you can do them as much as you want. It has no real effect on you. We say that about very few things actually in life.
Mm-hmm.
No one would say you can eat as many chips as you want and it will have no effect on you. No one would say you could smoke as many cigarettes as you want and have no effect on you. We see the effect when it's physical, when it's
Mm-hmm.
visible. But for some of these spiritual things, we have more difficulty seeing it. So instead of seeing these things as like, oh, big no nos, you're an awful person if no, see them as things that actually weaken our capacity to walk forward on the journey of love. You know, they're like pebbles that accumulate in our shoes
Mm-hmm.
that make it more difficult and more painful to actually be able to walk forward. And I think, if we take this fast food approach to sexuality, it doesn't just have an effect on us, you know, it has an effect on the kind of relationship that we can build with other people. So I would say, bear in mind the person that you want to love, the people that you really want to love well in life, and let that be your motivation for how you navigate through some of these, you know, beautiful but sometimes choppy waters of sexuality. The next thing I would say is I think we really need to discover the beauty, the value, the vocation of sexuality in our life as Christians, in our life as human beings. Seeing sexuality with God's eyes. God created sexuality. God created us man and woman. And somehow, mysteriously, he said that the fact that we are men and women, that we are people with a sexuality, every person, made with this sexual identity, somehow that reflects who he is. Somehow the image of God is in our masculinity and our femininity, and most of all, when those two come together. We see that already in the first pages of the book of Genesis. And then what do we see all the way at the other end of the Bible, in the final chapters of the book of Revelation? This amazing, unimaginable, eternal wedding feast between Jesus
Yep.
and the entire universe. So God, who comes to marry us and who calls us to have relationships with each other in which his love is present and alive in us as a way of moving us forward to this ultimate union between him and everything that he has created.
It's so beautiful what you said because at the end, yes, it's a relationship with you, your spouse, your husband, wife, but at the end, it's a relationship between God. I mean, without that relationship, oh man, everything will be it's so much harder and it's tough. At the end, it's that. And this is that I think I personally want to encourage people that that relationship, the first relationship you should have right now, it's you and God, and then that help is gonna help you to discern. But all these topics that we did, that we just talked, because these are important topics and they're necessary and it's normal. It's just normal to have all these questions. Julian, before leaving, finish this thing, this podcast, do you have something else to say to these adults about the theme of love?
Well, there are two things that I'd like to share. And one of them is from the gospel, and the other one
Mm.
is from Pope Francis. So I think I'll start with Pope Francis so that we end giving God the last
Yes.
word, from the word of God. And I think here, this is a quotation from Amoris Laetitia, which means the joy of
Mhm.
love. This is the document that Pope Francis wrote after the two synods that happened on the family. And those two synods in 2014, 2015 really talked about the gospel of the family, the good news of human love, of the love of husband and wife that then somehow, beautifully, mysteriously gives life to other human beings. And so here the Pope talks to us about how that love that's shared in the couple, in marriage, in family, is meant to overflow into the world and transform the world. So I want to share this with you. It's at paragraph 183 for anyone who's
If
interested, if
everyone
anyone
wants to
wants
see, you
to
can find
check
it
it out.
also in the internet, guys.
Exactly. For free on the Vatican website.
Yes.
So Pope Francis tells us a married couple who experience the power of love know that this love is called to bind the wounds of the outcast, to foster a culture of encounter, and to fight for justice. God has given the family the job of domesticating the world and helping each person to see fellow human beings as brothers and sisters. An attentive look at the everyday life of today's men and women immediately shows the omnipresent need for a healthy injection of family spirit. Not only is the organization of ordinary life increasingly thwarted by a bureaucracy completely removed from fundamental human bonds, but even social and political mores show signs of degradation. For their part, open and caring families find a place for the poor and build friendships with those less fortunate than themselves. In their efforts to live according to the gospel, they are mindful of Jesus' words, as you did it to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it to me. In a very real way, their lives express what is asked of all of us. When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your kinsmen or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return, and you will be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. You will indeed be blessed. Here is the secret to a happy family. So, how are our families not these little private cocoons that
Mm.
separate us from the rest of the world, but rather, how are our families places that are at the service of the common good of society? Places that help society to be more fraternal, more loving, more human, more familial. Because God's dream for humanity is that we all become one family, that we become his family, his sons and daughters, brothers and sisters of each other. And the family is like this beautiful hearth in which the fire of the Holy Spirit comes to warm us, to give us light, so that that light and that warmth can be shared and spread across the whole face of humanity. So when you're dating, when you start being with a person and all throughout your journey together, let's already have that in mind. That what we're called to here is to build a family together, a family in which God dwells, in which God is at home, and from which God goes out in us to be a leaven of love in the world.
Mhm.
So the next passage that I would like to share with you is from John 2. It's the wedding feast at Cana.
Mm.
On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and remained there for a few days. As we conclude here, I just want to underline a couple points from this amazing moment in the life of Jesus.
Mm.
Here there are these jars, these 6 stone jars for purification. They're filled with water,
Mhm.
but Jesus turns that water into wine. This is calling us to move from exactly what we've been talking about together, being set on becoming perfect, expecting that the other person become perfect, and rather opening ourselves to let God in, to let him turn our water into wine. And at the same time, that requires that we keep our jars full.
Mhm.
As Jesus says, fill the jars with water, fill them right to the brim. And once they're filled, then it becomes wine. Those little everyday things, those acts of service, those acts of giving of ourselves, of being faithful in season and out of season, that's the water of our lives. And Jesus comes to make that water into super abundant, amazing, fantastic wine.
Mhm.
Now we know from history that in Jewish weddings, especially at that time, put yourself 2,000 years back in Palestine, it was the bridegroom's job, the groom's job, to provide the wine. Now, who provides the wine here and who provides the best wine? The best wine that the steward has ever tasted? It's Jesus.
Jesus.
Jesus, who comes to be the spouse of humanity, who comes to love us, and who comes to love in us to make us more and more capable of loving one another.
So thank you so much, Julian, and everyone. Be that wine. Let yourself become that beautiful wine of love. Of it's and yes, we're water, but it's a beautiful transformation to become that wine because if we let, of course, God work, right? Because that's without God's work, we cannot just improve and we cannot grow like we already talked about. But thank you so much. Thank you so much, Julian, for everything, for all your kind words, and for your not sharing with us your knowledge, of course. So God
Thank you so
bless you.
much, Marybel. Thank you. Bless your family, bless your mission, bless your work. And it's always so good to be with you. And I hope we'll have another chance to talk again. And God bless all of you listening at home.
God bless.
All right, that's it for this week's episode, my friends. If you have questions about anything we've spoken about here on the podcast today, I would love to hear from you. You can always connect with me on social media. I'm Marybel Mayorga on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But for now, I want to thank you so much for being part of today's journey. And I'm really grateful that you chose to spend your time with me. God bless you.